You're listening to the Anxiety Reset Podcast. I'm your host, Georgie Collinson, anxiety mindset coach, gut health expert, and nutritionist. And this is where I share cutting-edge ideas and deep discussions to help you find more freedom, calm, and control in your life. In this episode, I speak with the incredible Dr. Caroline Leaf. She spent the last 30 years researching the mind-brain connection, the nature of mental health, and the formation of memory, particularly when it comes to our adverse experiences or what we call trauma, and how we can actually create an experience of post-traumatic growth as opposed to post-traumatic stress, which is what a lot of us are living with, especially when we have anxiety as a result of difficult challenges we've been through in our lives. She was really the first in her field to study how the brain can change when we direct our mind's input and create and make use of neuroplasticity. This is our ability to change the structure of our brain using our guided thought, choosing our thoughts, changing the way that we operate the machinery of our brain with our mind. We're going to unpack all of this in this episode. It's an absolute blockbuster. I was honestly just having the time of my life enjoying this chat while we dived into all these topics. We talk about the difference. There's a key difference between your brain and your mind. They're two different things. We talk about the mystery of the mind, what this is. We also talk about the process of undoing trauma and our different perceptions and interpretations of what it means that we've had something really hard that we've been through, something that shocked you, something that scared you, something that really challenged you in your life, and the way that that has then created this whole perception and all these belief structures that have emerged from that. We actually have the ability to change that process, and we can turn something really horrible that's happened to us and really challenging into something that actually uncovers and unleashes so much power for us. That is available for you as well. Dr. Leaf also shares her insights in whether the way that we're currently managing mental health is the most effective, and this idea, this culture we have of labeling different experiences as mental illnesses, when in fact more often than not many of us are having a normal human reaction to adverse events in our lives, to difficult challenges. To experience anxiety as a result of really challenging circumstances can be something that's totally normal. Your brain responding, your mind responding in a normal way, as opposed to something we need to make a pathology or a disease and then think there's something wrong with us. So absolutely loved this episode. You're going to love it too if already that's sounding exciting to you. So make sure you listen to the entire thing and let me know what you think of this episode. Share with me, share it on Instagram, on your stories, tag me. I'd love to see your thoughts and have you involved in this discussion as well. All right, let's go to the show. Welcome, Caroline. I'm so excited to chat to you today and just see what amazing gems of wisdom you bring to this chat. I know you've got so much gold to share. The first thing I want to start us with is just asking you, what is it that you just wish more women knew?
I just wish more women realized that, men and women, but to realize that the power of the mind and what the mind is, and that it's not your brain, that your mind is separate from your brain, and that you can actually control and change your brain. You can direct the neuroplasticity of your brain. It's not something that's spoken about enough to enough people. And even though I'm trying to tell as many millions as I can, it is so important because it brings such a different level of hope and empowerment to people. And that's what I found with my research and my clinical practice and being involved for years in this 38 years in the field. It's so important. And going hand in hand with that, I would also just like make the statement that you can't change what's happened to you, but you can change what's in you. And that's vital, in that whole process.
Oh, I like where this is going already. So let's talk about that. What is, for those who don't really see that difference between the mind and the brain, where are those differences? How do we start to become aware that we have, okay, I have a mind and I have a brain?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because in our current narrative, it's very much mind and brain are the same thing, or we're told that the brain produces the mind. And that's only one very small view, but it's very dominant in the scientific and it's a community, and it's become very much in the media frontline, but it's not accurate at all. And it's not what actually is happening. So the easiest way to understand mind brain differences is for those viewers that are just listening. I mean, those people that are just listening, I'm holding up a brain and a skull. You are not your brain. And that's really important to understand, that the difference between the mind and the brain can be understood in the most simple way of all. The difference between you and I and a dead person is our mind. So the mind is
Mm.
this aliveness, this ability we have as humans to experience life. All the ups, the downs, the everything about life, the good, the bad, the ugly. That's what our mind is doing. Our mind is helping us to. Our mind is how we experience life, and mind can be broken down into different elements, but the overarching concept is that mind is how we experience life, and the mind uses the brain and uses the body to actually convert this experience of life in all its different forms into actual physical structural changes in the brain, and that's neuroplasticity. And also, as soon as the brain is changed, it sends an instruction directly to the DNA, also through the mind. I mean, the mind's driving this whole process to change the DNA as well. And you store a representation of that experience in the gravitational fields of the mind. So it's a massively complex driving force, and it is the difference between an alive person and a dead person. So literally, when someone dies, their weight changes, and that's this mind thing that goes. It makes things work. So if I had to put an EKG on someone's heart who's dead, we would have no reading. If I put a QEEG on their brain, we'd have no reading. But you and I, they'd be going crazy. There'd be all kinds of activity happening and changing as we're talking. And so the technology shows us the evidence of mind in action in brain and body. So there's a beautiful relationship between this energy force of the mind and this think, feel, choose psychological aspect of mind, connecting with the physical structure of the brain and body, and stimulating a response in the brain and the body that then enables us to capture what we're experiencing as physical thought structures of product. We actually make the experience into a product in our brain. And then because of the brain body connection, then you are able to express yourself. So it's called psychoneurobiology, mind, brain, body. And we need to understand that division and that relationship, and that we actually drive it. When I say we drive it, our mind, we are mind. And it's our mind that is driving this process, because it's not there if someone's dead. So if the scientists will say, your brain made you do it. This is your brain on this. This is your brain on that. Your brain produces your thoughts. And they've been trying for years to tell us how your brain produces thoughts. And they can't get it right. And then you have all these studies, because I follow all these different scientists, and they come up with all these things of, we have found out how the brain does this. But it's not actually accurate, because they've got people doing stuff and the brain responding. And then they take the people away, the brain's doing nothing. Just take a dead brain, it does nothing. So it's like such a basic logical premise, but it's been very confused by the way it's been approached. When you get that your mind is your driving force, then you realize, okay, well, my mind, I can actually then I am mind, so I can control me. I can control this process, and how. And that's what I've spent 38 years understanding, is the psychoneurobiology connection and the power that we have over it, and the control. And how do you do that?
That's incredible. And I just absolutely love how science kind of highlights for us these mysteries of life. And what you're really alluding to, it sounds to me, is something very mysterious, which is this mind that we don't fully understand what it is, where it comes from. In my early naturopathy studies, we used to talk about that same, the weight that changes when somebody passes away, and I think it's 21 grams of body weight change or something.
Measurements, there's different, yeah. So, but that's close. That's one of it, sort of on average, yeah.
And we called it, that was the evidence around the vital force leaving the body, which is a similar thing. There's something that coordinates all the cells of our body and everything when we are alive, and for whatever reason is not there when we are not alive anymore. And it's interesting. I'm wondering what the interlap, or if it all is just the same thing. It's all mind. It's all consciousness in our body.
And it's more than just consciousness, it's non-consciousness too. And that's where we talk so much about consciousness that we forget all about the driving force behind consciousness, which is the non-conscious mind. So very, very few people talk about that. And that's been one of the most difficult sort of things to actually teach people, because the language is around consciousness, mind, brain. When you talk about non-conscious, I mean, I work with physicians, psychologists, and psychiatrists. They interview me, I interview them, and people immediately revert to the subconscious. They'll say subconscious or unconscious, but those aren't the non-conscious. It's different. The conscious mind is only awake when you're awake. It's a tiny portion of who you are. The biggest part of you is all your experiences. It's your non-conscious mind. It's the driving force. When you're asleep at night, you're not conscious, but there's still a one amazing amount of activity that's happening in your mind, brain, and body because of your non-conscious mind. So it's your driving force. It's your dynamic regulation of what's going on all the time. Your conscious is active regulation. And like now we're awake and you've got this active regulation, self-regulation of the conscious mind working with a dynamic which you can't really see or feel or touch, but it's the dynamic regulation that enables you to have your unique perception of what I'm saying, to be able to, as I'm talking, all kinds of thoughts are moving into your conscious mind from your non-conscious mind of previous experiences of all the people you interviewed and your own life experiences, and all kinds of things are moving up and down. And that's from the dynamic non-conscious mind, which never sleeps, never stops, is never just in the present. It's in the present, past, and future. And that's so important to understand that. So therefore it's bringing the present, past, and future into the conscious mind. And the more we learn to get the conscious connecting with the non-conscious, the more we manage to manage our minds. And that's what I talk about, is we've got to learn mind management. It's a skill that is there in us, but it's something we have to develop from very young. And it's never too late to develop the skill. But that's where freedom in our mind will come, with mind management, not with a technique, not with just breathing and meditation. I mean, those things all contribute to the neurophysiology, but they don't take you through the process of reconceptualization, or going, you've got to go beyond. You can't just get in the moment. You can't just become aware. You have to do something with what you're aware of. And so if a trauma comes up, you can't just be aware of it and then try and attach peace to it. You have to actually redesign it. You have to rewire it. Otherwise, it becomes it's a driving force in your unconscious mind. So a lot of the work I've done over the years, and in my recent trials, and I talk about it briefly in my new book, which is the one you interview me, this one, the cleaning up of mental mess, is I explain about the fact that, like, I developed a validation scale, a tool, a way of measuring a person's ability to be able to self-regulate. How much self-regulation and mind management are you actually doing? And it's really interesting because people in general are very, very come out very low on the scale. And as soon as you train them in mind management, we see massive changes, and they correlate with the changes in the brain. And your non-conscious mind is always 10 steps ahead of your conscious mind. Your conscious mind's always lagging behind. So things are happening in your non-conscious and your body and your brain long before we're consciously aware. So our conscious mind's always playing catch up. And you can kind of reduce that catch up time, and you can drive a different kind of interaction. And then that takes you to a whole new level of mental peace and managing things like depression and anxiety and stuff, which aren't illnesses. They simply signals that there's an imbalance in the body. And you'd understand that with the work you've done.
Oh, I love what you're saying there.
Philosophical here, but it's really interesting stuff, and it's something that I think we really need to talk about more.
Definitely. Oh my gosh. So what you're saying, because I remember so early in my journey, I had anxiety, especially in my early 20s. It was really, really intense then. And this idea, I came across this.
By the way, I didn't want to interrupt you, but it's very normal. Every human who's alive experiences anxiety, and extreme anxiety, or we have extreme anxiety in periods of our life. And early 20s is a very, very common time to experience severe anxiety. So I just wanted to say that to level the playing field, because we've made out like, oh, it's like it's like something wrong with you if you have anxiety. No, there's nothing. You're just being a human.
Oh, I love that too. Taking away the intensity of it and normalizing it, absolutely, I think is a huge part of sort of like being like, oh, this is okay. This isn't some huge drama that I'm feeling some anxiety right now. But I remember thinking at that time, I'd come across this idea of, change your thoughts are creating how you feel, and can you change the way that you think? And the idea of changing how I think just seemed impossible. It seemed so like, but it's happening all the time. How do I possibly control this? And of course, coming at it from that conscious mind does seem like an uphill battle. And so when it comes to looking at the unconscious mind, how do we tap into that?
Yeah, it's a really exciting part. And what you've identified there is what you've said there is very real, that people feel like they can't control it. So if we understand the process of how it happens, then you can understand how you can control it. So
Mm.
essentially, I'll try and explain this as simplistically as I can. And there's more
Yeah.
detail in the book. And I have an app as well that walks you through it, like literally therapy. It's called the Neurocycle app. And there's a podcast I have too, Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess. So there's lots of places where people can go and get more information. But the basic principle is that let's take what's happening now. We're having a conversation about mind, brain, mental health, anxiety, whatever you've called it in your mind, whatever you label this podcast. That's how people they'll see the label of the podcast and they'll listen. And I'm saying this very specifically because that is then the thought that is being created. So like we have different trees. We have a fir tree and an apple tree and different types of trees. So you get different types of thoughts, and thoughts look like trees. So that's why I always give the analogy of thoughts being trees. So our mind takes our experiences and converts them through that whole process of neurochemistry and energy and all that stuff, sound waves, light waves, creates this immediate genetic effect inside the brain, and microscopic changes start happening. And what those are that the information that's coming in is being converted into vibrations inside proteins, and the proteins group together. And it builds branches, and there's a root system and there's a branch system like a tree, and the root system is all the source. So what I'm saying are sound waves and light waves and electromagnetic forces, and that's being absorbed by you, and you processing that with your mind, your think feel choose, think feel choose, think feel choose, think feel choose, pushing that energy force through the brain. The brain is responding genetically, neurochemically, electromagnetically on a quantum level, and there's a conversion process and a product is formed, and you grow a tree. So you're busy growing a tree in your brain of my words at the moment. And so all the listeners of our conversation, and it's called brain health or mind brain health or mental health or anxiety, whatever you've labeled it. And what's significant here is that you driving that force, your mind. If you were dead, this couldn't happen. So once again, we come back to your aliveness, your conscious working with your non-conscious mind is basically doing this process. So the more to tap into the non-conscious mind, what we want to do is get more and more self-regulated. We want to manage that process. So look at this image now. For those of you that are listening, I'm holding up a little green tree in a pot. And obviously, if you grow a tree in a pot, it's going to have a root system. So you plant the seed, it grows roots and it grows branches. So this is exactly what you're doing in your brain. You're taking your experience of life, in this case, this podcast, you're listening to everything, watching if you're watching, that's electromagnetic sound waves and all those things, all the physics side goes in your brain. You put it in your brain, there's a reaction as it hits your brain genetically, and the content, the words, the data that are being built into these vibrations in these branches. But my words are the root system, and I'm saying a lot. So you're growing lots of roots. So that's lots of memories. So there's root memories, which is the source, and then immediately you grow branches, which are also memories, but that's your interpretation of that. So what I'm saying, you are uniquely perceiving in your own way because of your own experience already in your unconscious mind. So as you're building this, as you're listening to me and growing these roots in your brain, you're immediately taking all your life experience that's related to this, and you're interpreting what I'm saying and building branches. The branches are your thoughts, feelings, and choices around this content. And each of us, so everyone listening, has their own same root system but different branch system because it's their interpretation. Then that whole thing, the root and the branches, are then how you speak about this. So I'm speaking about all this brain science stuff, mind brain stuff, psychoneurobiology. I spent years building these thoughts in my brain. So I'm not talking from fresh air. I'm talking from branches, from root systems, my studies, my interpretation, my clinical experience, etc. So I'm speaking from what's planted in my brain and in my mind, in energy waves, and in my body, in my DNA. I've grown that in, and I'm operating from that. So now take it this way around. Now let's say that here's now I'm holding up a wiry, toxic looking tree. So this is now an unhealthy, toxic thought. So the root system is always the source. So now this could be the abuse, the bullying, the COVID experience, the isolation, the childhood trauma, the marriage trauma, the work trauma, the death, grief, loss, all of that stuff. And so the source is there. So we would have a different tree for, let's say there's a lot of childhood trauma. Maybe there's multiple different things. So there's maybe sexual trauma, and there's maybe physical trauma, and there's maybe, emotional trauma. Those would be linked, but they would be different trees. So there would be the sexual abuse, and there would be the physical hitting, and there would be the maybe bullying, but they all connected because it's childhood trauma. So the root systems tend to bleed into each other, and that as it happens, immediately we're building the interpretation. So that's the abuse that maybe the young child of 2 or 3 or 5 or whatever, 6 or 7, is now has this distortion. So they don't know how to interpret that. This person who's supposed to care for me and love me is now abusing me. How do I process that? So there's a distortion of that, and that then eventually that can become shame and guilt. And because very often people that have sexual, most of the times, 99% of the time, sexual trauma leads to a lot of self shame and self hatred and guilt. Meanwhile, you're the victim. But there's such a distortion, so everything becomes distorted. And so that source plus that interpretation over time then impacts how you function, how you behave. It produces the behavior. And that behavior may be withdrawn or aggressive, or emotions of depression or frustration, anger, aggression, whatever the perspective of I hate life and suicidal. All those are, this thing is producing those because these are distorted. This produces healthy responses, this produces toxic responses. And the longer they're there, the bigger it gets, the more impact it has, the more insidious the roots grow, and the more areas it affects. And that's why trauma is so insidious. And we need to be trauma informed. We need to, the anxiety doesn't just come from the fresh air. Anxiety is a warning signal. It's your body. It's an amazing thing. Anxiety is an amazing thing. It is a powerful messenger telling you, hey, you have some stuff going on here. You need to be a detective. It's a clue telling you, a warning signal telling you there's something going on, that the way you're thinking about and feeling and choosing about your life is because of a source. And you need to do the work to be a thought detective, to go from the signal to the cause, through a process of deconstruction and reconstruction, through embracing, processing, and reconceptualizing. So once you've become aware of it, you then have to reconceptualize that, because what happens in a lot of therapy and a lot of techniques is people either just recognize I'm behaving like that, there's something going on, but they don't unpack it and reconstruct. They don't deconstruct and reconstruct, process and reconceptualize. So they kind of get stuck. So they know I'm anxious because I had childhood trauma, but they don't know how to move forward. And so the meditation, you can do all the meditation in the world that you want, all the breathing that you want, but it's not going to be sustainable. You have to get this wired out of your brain. You have to change. This has happened to you, but you have to change what it looks like inside of you, because your brain and body neurobiologically are not wired for this. So therefore, your immune system recognizes this distorted protein in exactly the same way as it would recognize the COVID virus, for example. And so the
Mm.
immune system says, hey, no, that's threatening survival. Send out T lymphocytes, B lymphocytes, macrophages, get rid of this. And that then causes that response in the body to fight it. The same thing happens with our thoughts. We get it with the virus, but we don't realize it's happening with our thoughts. These thoughts are real physical structures in our brain. They are changes in our DNA, and they are in the physical field of our mind, which is then moving through our entire body. So our entire body is in this shockwave system from these toxic thoughts. And until they go, we're living in a volcano, and we're erupting, and it's erupting in all the elements of our life. And what we need to do is actually let the eruption happen and the lava come out and go through the healing process. Because whenever lava flows after an eruption, after a period of time, the lava changes the mineral status of the ground, and the most beautiful green fields will grow back. Lush green fields grow back over that damaged area. But if you keep on pushing down the volcano as long as you can, the explosion is bigger and bigger and bigger, and the lava is more and more and more. And if you keep feeding the volcano, it just keeps erupting. And so many people are living in this volcanic mode, and it's exhausting. And your body's saying, hey, your unconscious mind is saying, hey, that's imbalance, that's threat to survival. You're wired for love, you're wired for optimism. This is killing you. Your immune system sending out all these signals to fight at your body, your gut, your every part of your body, down to your DNA, to your telomeres. And I did research, very interesting research with telomeres, which we can talk about in a moment. But just to complete this thought, your whole body is responding. That's the GI symptoms, the shoulder pain, the neck problems, the cardiovascular issues, the whatever, the sicknesses you suddenly keep getting. Those are all your body saying, that's something's wrong. Pay attention. The depression, the anxiety, the panic attacks, the all those, the frustration, the sense of nagging, hovering, life is just, that worry and all that kind of stuff. Those are all signals telling you to pay attention, trying to restore the balance, and prompting you. So we mustn't ever ignore those, nor must you suppress them with drown them out with medication or things like that. We want to, as hard as it is, we need to embrace those, because the minute you embrace them, you start drawing this from the non-conscious into the conscious mind, and then you start connecting the non-conscious with the conscious mind. And as soon as you get awareness, as soon as you say, okay, I recognize the signals as signals. It's not me. I'm a beautiful, wonderful, incredible, wired, full of person. But I've had things happen to me, adverse circumstances. The minute you go into that mindset, you change 1400 neurophysiological plus responses in your brain and your body. This toxic thought moves from the non-conscious to the conscious. It becomes weakened. Physically, the protein bonds start weakening. So now you've shifted the power balance from this driving you, because it's had so many years to drive you, or so many months or whatever to drive you. You now saying, no, I recognize this for what it is. The anxiety has a reason. The depression has a reason. The panic attacks have a reason. Now you shift as soon as you say that, you shift the power balance. You give yourself permission. It's okay to be messy. This is normal human response. It's terrible. It's scary. It's horrible to heal, go through healing. But this is the only way you can do this. You have to literally have, like my friends that are surgeons will say, I have to cut you up and hurt you to make you better. And that's what we're doing. But we live in a society, as soon as you're experiencing any kind of symptom, suppress it, give medication, you're going to commit suicide with this. Meanwhile, those medications increase your chance of suicide. Years and years of suppressed anxiety will increase your chance of despair, which leads to suicidal ideation. And the longer we don't deal with our stuff, the longer we have society like it is currently, where we're not allowing ourselves to process, where we don't have support systems in place for our adolescents and our kids and our Gen Z, which are the most drug generation ever, that are potentially dying 8 to 25 years younger than any generation before, and that people in their prime are dropping dead like never before in history. And with all our advances in medical technology, it's because we are not operating in our humane processing deep spiritual nature. We're just taking a symptom and shoving a medical label on it and telling people that you've got this for life, like you've got cancer. And it's not even remotely like having cancer or diabetes. You don't need to validate the pain from an adverse circumstance with a disease label. That's invalidating. That's stigmatizing. It doesn't remove stigma. The research has shown it adds to the stigma. It makes people feel worse about themselves. It locks them in. So to come right full circle back to how do you get the non-conscious and conscious in tune, you have to manage your mind. And we have this phenomenal power as humans, an ability or skill, whatever you want to call it, to stand back and observe our own thinking in a very gentle, kind, and accepting way, and become thought detectives. And as soon as you do that, you will start blending the non-conscious with the conscious, and you go to a completely different level in functionality. And it's a lifelong journey. It's never going to go away, because you will have more trauma. You will have more things that will make you anxious. You will find a million things from the past that have changed you. And there's no shame in that. There's no shame on the parent, except if the parent was intentionally abusive. But parents, unfortunately, I've got 4 great old kids. I've caused them trauma without even knowing I've caused them trauma. It is a reality. And as soon as we blame everyone for everything, you're not going to get any. As soon as if you try and find why that person raped you, why that person, you're not going to find peace in that. What we have to recognize is that's terrible what they've done. There's not a lesson to be learned in rape. There's no lesson to be learned in being beaten up or physically abused or in a terrible marriage. There's no lesson there. What there is time that we need for healing, and healing to change what's happened to us. I mean, what's happened in us, because what's happened to us has happened. But we can change our responses to that, to give ourselves peace. We don't want this. We want to change how this plays out into our future. That's what I'm trying to help people understand. That's the power that we need to recognize that's in us. And people are not teaching it. I don't know, besides myself and a few other people, I mean, I don't know, people are not focusing sufficiently on it. There's more podcasts like yours and mine, thank God, out there that are making people look at their lives differently. But we need the hardcore skills. So I made the decision to go into it very scientifically and provide people with, this is how you do it. This is the time it takes. This is what you do. And it changes you.
The way you describe it is just so so like beautiful. It just brings it to life in a whole new way. And I can feel the branches of my trees like all.
Green ones.
Yes, they're all reaching out to different branches. And I'm like, oh, yes, I've never thought of it that way. And it's really cool to hear the way that you describe it. I just love it. I think as well, it's like we're living life and we're not given a manual. We're not taught how to deal with all these inevitable challenges that are going to come our way, which I honestly think, I don't know why we don't teach this in school. They're starting to teach meditation and things, but it's not enough.
No, I did a lot of programs in South Africa because I come from there, and I've done quite a few in Texas, Dallas, where I live at the moment. And I mean, my own kids, and in my practice, when I practiced as well, I would teach kids as young as 3. That was my youngest patients were 2 and 3, and I would teach them emotional mind management and brain building and all these skills. And it doesn't mean that my kids haven't suffered trauma. They have. They've gone through things. You can't put your kids in a bubble. They go through stuff, but they know what to do and they
Yeah.
know how to process it. And that's the thing. I mean, myself as well. I show with my research that if you manage your mind, you can get a handle, you can become 81% more effective in managing these things. So you don't try and live a life as the wellness industry and toxic positivity can very often make us feel like, do these steps, do this. What's wrong with you? You should be better by now. I mean, it's ridiculous. We put these recipes out there that no one can follow because it was your recipe. It
Mm.
was your formula that you can learn from. There's no harm in sharing what you did, but to say this is the way is always very dangerous. So what I've tried to do is develop a system. It's not a technique. It's not a prescription. It is how your mind will change your brain and your body. And it's how to get your messy mind working with your wise mind so that you can manage this process and that you can dig into the non-conscious and find these toxic issues and deconstruct them and reconstruct them and move beyond the mindfulness and of just being aware. So I've developed the neurocycle, and part of that is brain preparation. You have to prepare your brain. So that's where the meditation and stuff would come in. But that's not enough. You have to go beyond that to get into that state where you can actually manage your mind. And that's something we can learn. It's a skill. It's never too late. But honestly, the earlier we start, the better.
I love what you've alluded to there in that, I almost find that more eye opening. If there was just one system that was like, this is the system to get over anxiety, or sorry,
One
the
person.
one process, it's like, well, that's very limited. If I failed at that, for example, and it's like, oh, well, I can't do it. But
Yeah.
then there's so many ways. And if we
Yeah.
can just blend together our own, I almost see it as like putting together your own quilt or something, or like weaving your own tapestry for your own system that connects to your branches and your root systems.
Exactly, and that's I love that way. I mean, your own tapestry of your life. I mean, it's a beautiful way of looking at it because people over the years have developed incredible techniques and systems and and processes like there's ACT therapy and there's all the psychodynamic therapies and dialogue therapy and there's a lot of and CBT and all of those are great techniques. But if you don't use them in the right mind framework, you're not going to get the changes. And this is what research has shown. Like you can go and do the X amount of CBT, you can go do the meditation, but the sustainability goes unless you understand how to do the reconceptualization, unless you understand how to go beyond. So I tell people use the CBT, use ACT, use meditation, but use it in the right place and in the
Yeah.
right framework. Put it in the right the right system. Like Amazon is a delivery system. You can deliver anything anywhere, and it's so effective. Even if you don't like who runs Amazon and you don't like all the concept is brilliant. This is what the neurocycle is. You can deliver anything anywhere to your mind and your brain. You can use any way of doing it as long as you fit it into the system because that's how you make your brain work properly. And that's how you tear down those toxic issues and rewire them. And it's certain time frames and all that kind of thing.
Because I was going to say, this is almost a problem for scientific research in mental health when this is not where we can go, take this pill and you get this effect. And it's this controlled environment where we can look at no other variables. We're talking about this dynamic, like environment of thoughts and feelings and different experiences, which I think does create a sense of confusion in the mental health world and the research around all these things.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the drug trials themselves have been so discredited. I mean, the public doesn't hear about this because it's a money spinner. So, but in general, those that are, and people are becoming more aware, thank goodness. But essentially, the drug trials are very biased. And if you look at the research in terms of what's really happening, those drugs are not effective at all. They are really not effective. They numb the brain, and they give you a sense of, okay, I can just not think for a while and try and get your life. But once they wear off, you've got brain damage. Now you've got to sit with repairing that plus your issue. So it doesn't they really do not help, and they're so adamantly hanging on to those. And I don't want to make anyone feel condemned that's on drugs, because that's not my purpose. And if they've helped you to get to a point in your life, well, that's great. But and if you feel like you want to get off, taper off them. There's lots and lots and lots of available knowledge now about how to taper off, never to just stop a drug. As I'm talking specifically psychotropics, I'm not talking heart medication, I'm talking antidepressants, antipsychotics, benzos. We know without a doubt, even the NICE guidelines, which is sort of the body that the sort of the regulatory body that puts out the guidelines for how these drugs and things should be administered, and so on. They will tell you that these things, they've changed their regulations, because the research, they've had to see the research. These things are addictive. They change the brain. They have terrible withdrawal and side effects. They don't solve the problem. They actually create new problems, and people become addicted. They're very, very, very addictive substances. And a lot of places are recognizing that and helping people to taper off. But then these people are sitting with years of side effects. I mean, one of the main side effects of antidepressants is sexual issues, which in itself is a massive problem. Weight issues, it's just like we don't, we're not talking about those. It's all,
Mhm.
and the way they do the drug trials, it's like, well, these were doctors, 95% of these psychotropics are prescribed by primary care physicians or GPs. They have no training in mind, and they are prescribing so-called, all they know is that, all they train to know, and I train physicians globally, so I know this. They are trained to recognize those are the symptoms, like those are the symptoms of cancer, those are the symptoms of diabetes, those are the symptoms of depression. It's all been lumped in the same thing. Meanwhile, depression is not an it. You can't catch depression. You can't get depression, because it's not something that I can define. Cancer I can define. We can see. We can see it. We can treat it. These biomarkers. These, you can see it under microscope. You can't see that with depression. So they're trying to make it though it's in the brain, and there's something wrong with your brain causing it, but it's not. The cause of anxiety, depression, mind issues is life, the
Mhm.
adverse experiences, and the pressures of life. So, and then because life moves through the brain, the brain will be impacted right down to the telomere. So we will have a neurophysiological effect, but that's the key. It's an effect, it's a response, it's not a cause. So therefore, if it's an effect and a response, if we change our mind, we can change our brain. And I did some of that first neuroplasticity research back in the late 80s, where neuroplasticity wasn't even spoken about. Neuroscience was like in its infancy. It was like a new thing. Neuroplasticity it was like, I was told by my professors, that's ridiculous. So mind can't change your brain. There's the evidence, it's changed. So that's, we've got to keep pushing through. We've got to keep fighting for the fact that we are human and all of us are battling. Let's rather be honest about this, and let's rather help us process and get the science moving in that direction, instead of drugging people up.
Yeah, I mean, like I went through a breakup a year and a half ago, and looking at the diagnostic criteria for depression, I had depression,
Oh,
but
there you go.
I was going through a breakup and it got better, you know?
So you experienced something so normal. It's
Yeah.
it's it's awful to go through a breakup. And depression was a normal response. It wasn't something wrong with your brain. It wasn't something wrong with your identity. It was you heartbroken,
Yep.
and that needs you need time and sort of skill to process through that, and support. But
Yes.
yeah, you would have, if you had gone to your local GP and said you're feeling depressed, they would have, 3 minutes later you would have had a prescription.
I know.
And that, and it's just unfortunate. It's not the solution. And now
Yeah.
we have pandemic and anxiety, extreme. Everyone experiences anxiety, and the easiest way to understand this is to think of a scale. And if you think of a scale starting at 0, and then on one side it goes from 1 to 10, on the other side it goes from -1 to -10. And then there's a bell curve around -4 to +4. Now, the numbers represent anxiety or depression or frustration, life, the things that happen there, and our responses. So they're all signals. So all of us are experiencing frustration, stress, anxiety, toxic stress, I should say, anxiety, depression, to a certain extent in any one day, to different degrees and different levels. So you may get a really negative email that is like really is just awful about your business and makes you feel depressed for a few hours. And then you have something else that makes you feel very anxious because it's attacking your financial situation, or but you kind of manage it during the day. So we kind of get through that. Then you have a great moment, and so that in general we get through the day. But then we have things that accumulate that we don't deal with, and the pressures build up, and then it starts shifting down into beyond the -4, -5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And that's when we crash. That becomes, those are the extreme states. They're not mental illnesses, which is what they're called. They are not mental illnesses. They are responses that are impacting brain function and body function. So your body and brain are telling you with all the signals of sore gut and all these things, hey, respond, pay attention to the source. There's a source for this. So we can shift our mindset from I'm ill, I have a mental disease, to oh, that's a signal. It's telling me something. I need to pay attention. There's something in my life that's pushed me into this extreme state. So now we see anxiety on average, people, about 30% of people fell into this extreme state at any one time. So about 70% of people are in that bell curve area, and about 30% of people, this is very broad, okay?
Mm.
And that doesn't mean that 30% of people have mental illness. That's not what I'm saying. It means that 30% of people are in a more extreme state in that time period of their life. But it's not their clinical diagnosis. It's not their future. It's where they're at their moment. So it's not a being, it's a doing. It's an experience. Okay.
Yeah.
So then now we have COVID, massive global adverse circumstances affecting all of us. I mean, our 18 to 24-year-olds have been so badly impacted because their whole future was taken away. And a person in that age group, their whole life is on their future, on this endless hope that they have. You take hope away from someone, you have despair. So we have extreme despair amongst our 18 to 24-year-olds from the whole abnormal nature of the pandemic and the isolation, and they're forming, that's the most, one of the most difficult age times, cycles of the human life. So it's been, and 12 to 24, it's been desperately affected. So now we have that increasing that experience. So we see that extreme anxiety has tripled. So now we can broadly say that that anxiety is now 90%. It's at a 90% level. So we have this almost 90% of certain population groups are in extreme anxiety. But that doesn't mean that we have an increase in mental illness. It doesn't mean like the COVID virus spread, that anxiety has spread. And that's the message we're getting. It's been
Mm.
compared that. It's been compared that COVID is one pandemic, anxiety is another pandemic. See, or mental illness. And they've been put on the same level as being these diseases. And that's that's going to limit us. It has. It's messed up. It's messed up, and I talk about this in the book. It's actually increased people's death rate and hasn't reduced people's death rate. We've had this increase in deaths of despair, this reversal of trends of people living longer. So people in the Gen Z and then 24 to 65 are at the most risk of dying 8 to 25 years younger. First time in generations. Terrible. They'd be so advanced, yet we've gone so backwards. So we've got this situation where we've now got these people in these extreme states of anxiety. So what are they saying? They're saying that general things, oh, mental health, mental illness has increased. We need to increase diagnosis and treatment, which means drugs, and labeling, which locks people in. That's just going to make the situation 10 times worse. So the pandemic, the mental health pandemic, is not mental illness being caught or increasing. It's mismanagement of mental health that's creating this terrible side effect. So what we need to do is shift our perspective and recognize that extreme anxiety is a completely normal reaction to adverse circumstances. We've got to look at each population group and how it's affected them, because it's different. For example, the older generation have also experienced severe depression as much as the 18 to 24, but it's totally different. They've actually coped better than the younger age group, even though they've been more isolated, because the younger age group have more technological skills. So how we have an older generation very depressed, but not as depressed as the younger generation, yet they're more isolated. What's going on? So the younger generation have been able to connect to a certain point because they're more technologically proficient, but they don't have any context. They don't have much past to fall back on about big stuff. You know, they're like, when you're that age, you don't think like that. You don't think contextually. But someone in their 50s and 60s and 70s thinks contextually. So they're
Yeah.
thinking in this big picture, oh, I got to this. This too shall pass. So what I recommend is taking is taking these two generations and bringing them together and sharing, letting the younger generation help the older generation technologically wise to reduce the isolation. Let the older generation teach the younger generation about context, about this and this and this happened in the past, and this is how I got through it. In other, you know, see what I'm saying? And we're
Mm.
not doing that. We're not looking what they're putting billions into more drugs, more what's going on in the brain. It doesn't matter what's going on in the brain really in terms of cause, in terms of effect, yes, because then we can address the medical needs that will arise out of the cardiovascular issues that are going to happen when you have someone who's totally stressed out from the pandemic, like I've described. You're going to have an effect, for example, on your telomeres, and telomeres are the ends of chromosomes, and chromosomes are in your DNA, and we are all making 1 million cells every second. So basically, if that's the case, if we're making our new bodies, if we're making new bodies all the time, and that groups into our organs, so brain, lungs, everything. So 1 million cells every second. Now, that process is driven by your mind because dead people don't make new cells. So your mind, you're alive, it's driving the cell division. The telomeres, which are, if I take across my fingers, that's what a chromosome looks like. It's a little X thing. And my nails would then be the telomeres. And telomeres are the ends, and they're very, very, very involved in cell division. So if they're weak, we have weak cells. We have unhealthy cells and unhealthy body parts, therefore, because cells make body parts, make systems, make organs, etc. And the telomeres are controlled by mind. They are driven by the energy force of mind. So if my mind's a mess, my telomeres are a mess, my cell division's a mess, my body's a mess. So I saw in my clinical trials, and this is very new research in this area, and we decided to incorporate that into the trials just to show that when we manage our mind, so we make it super simple. You get a chronological age, which is your actual age, and you get a biological age, which is the age of your organs based on your cell health, which is based on telomeres. So we can look at your DNA and see pretty much what your biological health is like. And that can change, fortunately. And so what we saw was some of our subjects at the beginning of the trial, they had biological ages that were way older than their chronological age. So we had like 30-year-olds with 65-year-old sick bodies. Now, if you're 30, but you've got a 65-year-old sick body, your vulnerability to disease, cardiovascular, strokes, hypertension, has increased by 35 to 98%. So then if that doesn't change and you don't manage that process with lifestyle changes, and that's not just diet and exercise, it's mind, then lifestyle, and mind drives lifestyle, exercise, diet, etc. If you don't change that, your body's just going to get sicker and sicker. So you are going to be at risk of having a heart attack when you're 40 instead of 80. You know, that's the kind of thing. That's why people are dying younger and dropping dead, and suicides increasing, because we're not mind focused. We need to focus on our mind. We need to be able to be human again. So I mean, that's a lot. I'm throwing a lot at you, but that is like what's going on.
No, I love it. And especially, I think there's been some studies in, I want to say Finland or Norway of connecting the youth with the elderly. And, you know, I love these
Beautiful.
outside of the box thinking around how we solve these things rather than, and I have recently heard something about one of the quickest ways, I don't know if this is validated, so no, everyone just take this with a grain of salt, but one of the quickest ways that we can solve the mental health crisis or reduce the mental health crisis and the, if you want to call it that, and the climate change issues as well is introducing a 4-day work week, which is just another really interesting concept, right? That's not, we're not adding more drugs into things or, you know, looking at,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And that's fine. The decision to reduce it to a 4-day week, someone thought of that. So someone's mind was involved in that decision. See, mind drives everything. So we use our mind to make decisions, which then impact how we run our lives. So we have a group of people that are using their minds wisely and saying, how can we change climate and give people more extended, healthy lifespans and stop this incredible work pressure? 4-day week is a brilliant idea. You reduce carbon emissions, you reduce this, you reduce that, you give people more time to rest, their quality of work improves, blah, blah, blah. So you then, but that's mind
yeah,
that's driven that decision.
yeah,
So, you know, if we can see that, so we need to we need to have wisdom we've been lived in an era of our mind going crazy where let me say that again, we've been living for a 40-year technological driven, the more work I do, the more efficient I am, the less sleep I have, the more the cleverer I am, or the brighter I am, or it's like that we're rewarding people for not sleeping and working themselves to death. And we're rewarding people for, then we say, okay, you're feeling stressed, go do this amount of meditation. Well, it works. Why? What's wrong with you? So it's always back to the individual, but it's the environment we live in. The environment produces the experiences, and the experiences come from other people's choices. So we are always at the beck and call of people's experience, of people's choices, which become our experiences, which become our physiology. So we've got to fight that back so that we can change the whole cycle. So it's good you brought.
Which all comes back to just empowering yourself and knowing that you have that ability to, change these things. When we are looking at our story of life and we've been through something pretty traumatic or a trauma, it can be easy to fall into this belief that I've had that thing. And so because of that thing, I'm now not going to ever be that level of happy, that contented feeling in my life. Post-traumatic stress, we hear about all the time. It's a disorder. And we're just going to carry that for the rest of our lives. I even saw something about grief, a diagram on social media somewhere about how the grief doesn't get smaller over time. We just learn to carry it better or something like that. And these ideas, right, that we kind of gather this gunk through our lives and it just weighs us down more and more. But what you're suggesting, Caroline, we'll take that away. What do you think of that concept?
It's brilliant what you said there. It's really good you've raised that. It all goes down to that first statement that I made, and that was that we can't change what's happened to us, but we can change what's happening in us. So yes, there is a very, very, very negative philosophy, very toxic philosophy that it's happened to you. Like you're an addict, you're always an addict. Addiction is a disease. That's the biggest lot of nonsense out. Addiction is not a brain disease. You're not caught in this brain that's now suddenly drawn to these alcohol or drugs or whatever. Drugs, yes, they do change the pattern of the brain, and yes, we do. But all the research shows that even those with the worst addictions, that their life has collapsed because of them, get out of them. 86 to 94% of people get out of addictions through choice. So in other words, once they recognize, because addiction is not a disease, it's a response, it's a warning signal, it's a way of coping. It's simply where you are at that moment. There's a relationship between the drug of use or the substance of use and the traumatic experience. And so when you look at it, and I'm using that as an example. So if we look at that, you don't have to, like the 12-step program, will say, I am an addict for life. No, that's the most terrible thing, because you then wire, this becomes your dominant focus. I'm looking at me as an addict. Where's my hope? Where everything I'm going to bring back to that, everything that challenges me and doesn't feel right, oh, it's my addiction. It's the core. Whereas if I say, okay, addiction is a symptom or a signal of an underlying cause, and I recognize that, I embrace it, I process through, and the neurocycle is how there's the system within which that I'm suggesting people do, because that's what I've scientifically researched. And you then deconstruct this, you take the energy away from that toxic thought, and you build a healthy replacement thought. Now, for those of you that are viewing this, I've got the little leafy green tree, and I'm going to pull a little piece of it out. Now that toxic issue has now been redesigned. It's still toxic. That's what happened to me. That's the trauma. But now it's in what I want it to be. I've changed what it looks like in me. I want it to play out differently in my future. I don't want my future to be controlled by me hating myself and not having a decent identity and thinking that I'm controlled by an addictive substance. No, I'm fixing my brain. I don't want to be controlled by that. Traumas will happen. I will get knocked. But if I fall down, it's not because I'm an addict. That's gone. I was using substances to manage terrible pain, but now I understand why and what, and I've deconstructed. This is now my modus operandi. And yes, I will cry and be sad, and I remember my story, but I have a whole network that is now my modus operandi, and that takes time. And that's the philosophy that I'm trying to, which is kind of what I'm saying.
Yeah. And creating this flourishing green garden of the way that we view ourselves and view our lives. And that's not toxic positivity. As you said, you can still cry about it. You can still feel sad about it, but it's not seeing it in a way that this is, this cancer that's going to kind of take over your entire life. And
not who you are. It's not your destiny. This is not who you are. It's who you have become because of experience. And you can unbecome anything you've become, because at your core, your identity is who you are. It's wired for love, wired for optimism. That's who you are. Stuff
Yeah.
happens to who you are, and that messes you up. So you can get that back again. You'll be changed, because in the mess you grow and repair. So you don't ever want to be the same. No one is ever the same. That's the other thing. Identity is a growing process. It's a verb, not a noun. And so the core of who you are is there. It's perfect, but it's constantly developing. So this whole thing of, oh, we've got to get back to normal, or I want to be who I was, that's an unrealistic expectation too, because you're never the same. Your brain is constantly changing, because your mind is constantly changing, because life is constantly changing. So how can you be the same person if you have been abused, or if you've just gone through a terrible breakup and a very sad breakup? You're different. You're still you, but you're different. You've had a mess, and you've repaired, and you've grown from that. And so that's what we've got to keep looking at, that growth process. It's okay to be messy as long as you're managing it. And that's how you go and repair.
Yeah. And that term, I love that you've used this. I haven't heard this before, post-traumatic growth.
Yes, that's very popular now. Everyone's talking about that. And that's essentially what I'm talking about. It's a
Yeah.
great term to explain. You are pretty much growing post-trauma, but it's repair and grow. Mess, repair, grow. It's not your destiny. And
Yeah.
so the older philosophy is that this is your destiny. And that's why AA programs do change people, for example, but they're not sustainable. People stay very stuck in that mold. And the ones that really move forward, if you listen to what they're actually saying, they're not seeing themselves as an addict. They're seeing themselves as having gone through. And that was a coping mechanism. It was just a signal. It was a way of coping and dealing until they could face the truth of what happened.
Yeah, I've often heard people say, I just have an addictive personality, whether it's video games or food or whatever it might be. And I'm just like, we kind of all do. Like in the sense of we are all looking for ways to escape our pain and to manage it better.
Exactly. Because healing is awful. It's a
Yeah.
terribly difficult process. I call it the treatment effect. Things will get worse before you get better. We had subjects in our clinical trial, and I had it in my patients, my practice, where people, and I mean, I've experienced it myself. When you face stuff that is the reason behind your depression, and you see these terrible things that have happened that have made you feel this, it makes you feel worse, but it's a different kind of worse. So we would have like our subjects in our clinical trial saying things like, at the beginning, I am depression, and then through the midpoint saying, I'm not depression, but I feel worse. But it's a different kind of depression. It's a depression because I'm sad at what I'm seeing, to hitting this 21-day mark where they actually then say, hey, I'm not depression. I'm depressed because of, and then hitting the 63-day mark where there's behavior change. So it takes around 21 days to sort of get to the root, to deconstruct and reconstruct and remove this energy and get the healthy thought. But then that healthy thought has to be activated. It has to be grown and be made part of your life, turn into a habit. And that takes another 42 days. So unless you work in cycles of these more or less 63 days, give or take a couple of days on either side, but these kind of 9-week blocks, you're not going to rewire your brain, and you're going to fall back in the old patterns. So what happens a lot with patients in therapy and people that are doing whatever to become aware, going through, even like yoga can really bring stuff up, and that's good. It's not bad. But if you just bring it up and you don't do anything with it, your anxiety levels will increase. And if there's no mind management, you're going to get worse, and then you're going to push it down. And then you can actually then go to yoga 500 times a day. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but then you use what was good, but it becomes addictive. Instead of going like a normal amount of times, you're going excessively, and suddenly you're doing all kinds of things because it's a distraction. It changes how you feel in your body, but it's not solving the problem. It's only because those are designed to bring from your body to your brain to your mind. Now you've got to do the work, and that hurts. That's scary. But eventually you get to the point where, okay, I accepted this uncertainty, depression. This is all part of life.
Yeah.
But just how can manage it, and that gives you the sense of peace.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for being here. I just like the truth you speak, and you speak it in such a way that, gosh, like people listen, and that we need that in this world. We need to be really these concepts, right? They're so easy to take on a esoteric level, and you really bring it and ground it in that science that just demands respect and honor. And so I just want to acknowledge you for that and appreciate that. I do have a question for you though, one last one, which is just, where can we find you? Where can we get your book? Where do we get your app?
Absolutely. Well, the app's easy. It's called Neurocycle, and it's a download on iTunes or Google Play. The book's available wherever books are sold, also on my website. cleaning up a mental mess. The first part of the book kind of discusses all the things we've been discussing. The second half is how to do the neurocycle, which is a system I've developed over 38 years, heavy clinical research and clinical application and clinical research looking at the mind brain body connection. So it's a very systematized, organized system that you don't skip any of the steps. Each step is doing these amazing things in your brain and your body systematically, getting you to a resilient state that you can reconceptualize. And the whole how to do the 63 days, all of that's in the book. So it's very practical, lots of examples, how to use it with trauma and all that stuff. In the app, I literally give you therapy. I literally walk you through that. So the book's available wherever books are sold. My social media handle's Dr. Caroline Leaf. And I've got a podcast called Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess, same title as my latest book. I have lots of other books and programs too.
Incredible. Well, I'll have all of that information in the show notes. Thank you so much. And I hope you have a wonderful evening where you are. It's been wonderful to chat to you. And I just hope you continue, spreading this message. You obviously are doing everything you can. You've got a book, you got the podcast, you got everything there. And I just know everyone's going to absolutely love this episode. So thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much. I enjoyed our talk. It was getting nice and deep.
Yeah, I love a deep chat.
It was so good. Thank you so much.
If you're ready to get to the root cause of your anxiety and leave no stone unturned, covering every facet of the anxiety reset method, from the thoughts you think to the health of your gut, your nutritional status, your hormones, and your lifestyle, then jump on the waitlist for the 90-day Anxiety Reset Program. This is the tried and tested path to help you find your true self, feel more balanced, and really become the master of your anxious mind. You'll be first to hear about the exciting upgrades when the program is next available. And you'll also hear exclusive benefits around the membership program that will be offered very soon. And if you want me all to yourself and have the VIP treatment, then join the waitlist to become a private client in the Balance program. Through our intensive 3-month program, we work closely together, tailoring a plan specific to every individual need you have. Completing your application for Balance, you'll be the first to hear when my next client space opens. And no matter which option you decide is best for you, I'll give you all the tools you need to ensure you become an anxiety master. Thank you for listening. We have reached the end of this episode. If you enjoy this podcast and you find it helpful, I would really appreciate it if you would hit subscribe or share this episode on your Instagram stories and make sure you tag @Georgie the Naturopath. But that is all for today. Please be kind to yourselves. Know that you are enough and you are exactly where you need to be.